Welcome to another episode of DECIDEthought. I am your host, John Hemeyer. Loki episode 2 has been out for a few days now, and there are many scenes we want to talk about, but we're going to be focusing on a specific set of scenes in today's dive.
Beware, all ye who continue beyond this point, for spoilers lay ahead.
Okay, seriously though, spoilers ahead. We're going to be taking a look at the Apocalyptic Event reports. Now, a few other channels have mentioned these in their review and Easter egg episodes, and before we start, I want to give a shout out to Emergency Awesome. Based on the two reports they showed, their determination is valid. However, they went off of just 2 data points. That's not nearly enough to form a valid hypothesis. Today, we're going to fix that. How? Because there are more than 2 apocalyptic event reports shown in the episode. Let's take a look at the clips we are sourcing our information from. Okay, so we have the 2 reports shown in the episode itself, the Class 7 Apocalypse report being the destruction of Asgard, and the Class 10 Apocalypse report being the Roxcott disaster. These 2 reports are clearly seen and readable in the episode. However, there are also 3 additional Apocalypse reports shown within the credits. One which hangs upon the wall, which appears to be listed as a Class 5. A second that is a Class 3 that can be seen under a stack of papers. And finally, if you look closely, you can see part of a Class 2 Apocalypse event report under a book and covered by papers as well. Now, seeing as how these 3 reports are not as readable or complete, we decided to recreate each of the reports in a more readable format. Before we continue, I should note that the lighter colored text in the following images are our assumptions about what could be written based on the context that is readable. Let's go from Class 10 and go down. Our Class 10 report is the Roxcott disaster. It is noted as having destroyed the entire town, had 10,835 human casualties, and its location is noted as Haven Hills, Alabama in 2050. The source gives a number of case files and a summary of the events, which is not noted here. We wanted to start with this report because of its mention of a Category 8 hurricane. Currently, our hurricane measurement system only goes up to Category 5. And seeing as we've had this system since the 1970s and it hasn't changed in those 50-ish years, it's hard to comprehend us getting to a Category 8 in under 30 years. But if we use the current system and extrapolate, we can see how powerful a Cat 8 will be. However, beyond Category 5 might not be based on wind speed alone. It might also be based on the suddenness of the storm. This is represented in the episode when we are told they are looking for an unexpected and sudden event. Most hurricanes, you have days, if not weeks, of warning. And for a Cat 4 or above, most people will evacuate. So, hearing a Category 8 on the way, that town should have been completely empty. As such, it is the opinion of DECIDEthought that the Category 8 storm is categorized partly by its suddenness, and was one of the first such storms in that timeline. This means that in 2050, the Category 8 still is not a real category. It was likely at that time just called a superstorm. And the Category 8 designation comes from later in the timeline, which the TVA will naturally know about. Next up is our Class 7 apocalypse. This is the only report that is not an apocalypse event report, but rather it's an incident report. It declares total planetary destruction, 9,719 casualties, and that the entire civilization was annihilated. Now, we know from Thor Ragnarok and later movies that there were indeed survivors. So why claim that the civilization was annihilated? We believe that in this instance, the TVA is taking civilization to mean all the art, written history, and cities of that civilization. For instance, in the real world, the Mayan civilization is gone. But there are people who claim to be of Mayan descent. Thus, the Asgardian survivors would be considered descendants of the Asgardian civilization, but their new home and ties on Earth make them a new and completely different civilization than their origins. Our next apocalypse comes from the report hanging on the wall in the credits. It is very blurry and quite difficult to read in each scene that it is shown. While this could be a Class 4 report, we believe it is a Class 5, mostly because when you blur the lettering of those two words, 5 is a closer blurred match. Now, there's a lot of unreadable information in the source, but we can read a few words. Due to this being present in a Loki episode, the event analysis declaring the failure to intervene and the FRI listed on the casualty line of this report style leads us to believe this is about Thor the Dark World. That would make the FRI Frigga. And the report is specifically about when Asgard was invaded by Malekith's army. By the report being Asgard invaded by Malekith's army, rather than the failure to intervene in line, the heavily blurred red text portion fits much more appropriately. As has been noted on a few channels, there is a Class 3 apocalypse report that is clearly visible in the credits. This report is about the J.D. Cooper incident, gives a list of the crimes, no casualties, and the location as Seattle, Washington, 1971. While the report is shown in the credits, the incident itself was shown back in Loki Episode 1. Now, we come to our last apocalyptic event report. This one I haven't noticed any other channel mention, and it is almost a blink and you'll miss it type thing. As mentioned earlier, if you take a look at the scene in the credits where there's a large open book, underneath it there is a report that is mostly covered, but what can be seen is fully legible. This report directly declares that it is about the Battle of New York from the first Avengers movie. It declares a theft and misuse of something, likely the theft of the Tesseract and subsequent misuse of it. Of note, it seems to declare around 74, possibly 740-ish casualties within INC, which is potentially an including portion. This implies to us that there were 74 human casualties, including an unknown number of Chitauri casualties. Okay, so that's now 5 data points we have. Now, we can try to determine how the apocalypse classifications are scaled. Immediately, these data points show us that the higher the classification, the worse the apocalypse class. But there are a few oddities. Most notably, the Class 2 apocalypse has casualties, but our Class 3 apocalypse does not. And the difference between our Class 7 and Class 10 apocalypses, the number of casualties is relatively small. And the Class 7 even includes destruction of a planet, while the Class 10 is only a small town. So clearly there is something beyond casualties and destruction that determines what the class of an apocalypse is. But what is that missing information? Well, unless and until they give us that information on screen, that is for you to decide.